Welcome. You're watching AAU Conversations with Verdel Jones. Before we start, how do you interact with your peers? How do you interact with authority? How do you learn how to be mindful of other people?
Police are known as the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system. That means before the process starts, it has to go through the police.
Welcome to AAU Teen Talk TV. You're watching Conversations with Verdel Jones. Being a teacher at heart, I'm dedicated to sharing relevant and concrete information in the hopes that you learn something that you might not know. And in the words of Maya Angelou, when you learn, teach, and when you get, give. We have an exciting show for you this evening, and I'm so happy to have our special guests here, and I'm going to introduce him in a moment. We're going to be talking about health and nutrition and soul food and how that all connects together. So I have the perfect guest to talk about that. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors, Mr. and Mrs. Roger and Shavonna Johnson. They are the founders of the Whitney E. Johnson Foundation. They're the executive producers of AAU Teen Talk TV and radio, and they're also the founders of AAU Youth Magazine. Now, AAU stands for All About Us, and that's what we're about here at AAU Teen Talk TV. So for more information, you can visit the website at wejfoundation.org, and be sure to order your AA Youth Magazine today. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about health and nutrition in the Black community and soul food. And I couldn't think of anybody more appropriate to talk about soul food than our guest this afternoon, Mr. Byron Hurt. Byron Hurt is an award-winning documentary filmmaker. He has, made films. This one we're going to be talking about, particularly Soul Food Junkies. He has been on every major media circuit that you could imagine, from BET to Fox News to MSNBC. He's featured in the New York Times and also Black Enterprise. So when you're talking about soul food, I think Byron Hurt is a great person to talk to. So I'd like to welcome Byron Hurt to our show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Like I said, we're delighted to have you here. Health and nutrition in the Black community. Your film, Soul Food Junkies, really focuses on that topic so well. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Before we get started with that, I want to give our viewers like an idea of your journey as a filmmaker. Like, did you start wanting to be a filmmaker? And if not, how did you get into it? And what was your trajectory, in this process?
Well, I went to college and studied journalism. I majored in journalism when I went to Boston. I went to school at Northeastern University. And I did several internships at TV stations. I worked at 3 TV stations in Boston as a student. And I learned that I wanted to do something that was beyond journalism. I wanted to cover issues and topics that went deeper than a television news station could actually get into. So I took a class when I was a junior or senior called Blacks in the Media and the Press. And that's when I became familiar with the work of Marlon Riggs, who is a deceased documentary filmmaker. But, his work was brilliant and it really moved me. I watched his films, Tongues Untied, Black Is, Black Ain't, Color Adjustment, and other films that he made, and I was just really blown away by his ability to make me think.
Right.
And I had studied issues around black culture and Black history, but his films did something different for me than an actual book,
right.
a history book could do. Yeah,
right.
And so I just said, this is what I want to do. I want to do the same thing to other people that Marlon Riggs did to me, and so that's how I got into it.
Right, and specifically you focus on documentary filmmaking, and that's one of my favorite genres because
is it really?
It really is because I respect the research and the development of it and how you're able to put all those pieces together to tell a story. And the focus really with the documentary films is you know, you could tell a story about anything, but you have to really find something that is going to spark the interest of individuals to even watch it.
Yeah.
So that process of making documentary films, and we had talked earlier, you on the radio show, and I kind of said it was like a dissertation almost, because all of the research that you put into, you know, creating your films, it's amazing. So it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because, you know, when you say that documentary filmmaking is your favorite, because a lot of people ask me, when are you going to make a real movie?
Right.
You know? A lot of people say, you know, a lot of people don't really respect the genre of filmmaking in the same way that they do feature films, you know, big Hollywood blockbuster films.
Right.
And that's something
Star
that
Wars.
I've had to, Star Wars, you know, other films.
Right.
You know, films that Spike Lee makes,
Yes.
and, you know, other filmmakers. So I've been kind of battling that attitude or perspective for a very long time. But I love making documentary films. I love it. It's my passion.
Right.
I don't know. It's something about the process of making films, of conceptualizing something, coming up with an idea that really starts in your head first and only in your head, and then committing it to paper and writing a treatment, and then being able to convince people that your idea will translate to the screen well, and then being able to execute it, because you can come up with an idea. Anybody can have an idea, but it's executing the idea.
Absolutely.
That's the real challenge.
That's
right?
the challenge, and that speaks to, you know, I've watched Soul Food Junkies, and we're going to be talking about that in a minute. And I'm going to show a clip in a minute, and I've watched it several times, and I was sharing with you that I had watched like a 2-minute, I think, segment of it, and then I remembered how much I really enjoyed, you know, the movie. So speaking of Soul Food Junkies, again, it was a wonderful film. It has a little bit of humor at times. It's laugh out loud funny, but it also has a message to it. So I kind of say it's like delightful and insightful, and it really does a good job of showing how soul food affects our community. So I'm really excited to kind of further that discussion. So it explores the African Americans' relationship with soul food, and it was very well researched and very well done. So right now we're going to show a little clip. It's actually a trailer of Soul Food Junkies.
Cool.
Good Lord, good meat. Come on, let's eat. Hallelujah.
Barbecued ribs, grits and eggs, collard greens, ham hocks, black-eyed peas.
You haven't had nothing till you have my black-eyed peas.
America's soul food, a cultural treasure,
Soul food for me is love.
or a national health hazard.
She'll call it death food because it will kill you.
What turns me on today is a nice salad. Onions and the beets and the carrots and...
No fried chicken?
Well, hard giving up that fried chicken.
Soul Food Junkies.
So that was a trailer for Soul Food Junkies. We're talking to Byron Hurt, award-winning documentary filmmaker. So why this film? Why did you decide to make Soul Food Junkies?
Well, I made this film because I wanted to get people to start thinking more critically about the food that we put into our bodies and the food system that has an impact on all of the food that we have access to in our communities.
Right.
And that was the reason why I made it. But I was really inspired by my father's relationship with food and my struggle and my immediate family struggle to get him to change his eating habits, which was really hard to do. My father loved food, and he loved eating all kinds of foods, but you know, soul food was probably number one.
Right.
You know, he grew up in Georgia, in the deep South, and in the 50s and the 60s, and you know, so soul food or Southern food was a big part of his identity and who he was. Right. And so for anyone to try and change that was very difficult. You know, it was very challenging. And so he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, which is a really virulent form of cancer.
Right.
And one of the things that I learned early on was that if he was going to have any chance of beating that kind of cancer, he was going to have to radically change his diet.
Right.
And so that became my focus as his son, you know, to really kind of help him to do that. He expressed a desire to do that, but it was something about expressing the desire and then putting that into action and actually doing it that seemed to be very difficult. And so, you know, I thought to myself, well, if this is someone whose life is on the line, he still can't change his diet, you know, what's going on with other people, I'm sure that there are other families who are dealing with very similar situations. I started doing research, and I started to see how there was a connection between diet and illness, nutritional-related illnesses. I started to see how African Americans, Latinos were at the very top of almost every nutritional-related illness, from cancer to diabetes to heart disease, hypertension, all of them. And I said, wait a minute, what's going on here? And in almost every, I guess every article that I read, most articles talked about how food and nutrition was a major part in either getting a disease or preventing a disease. And so I said, this is something that I want to explore.
Right.
And that's when I came up with the idea.
Right. Yeah. And, in the clip, I think it's in the clip we just saw, Dick Gregory refers to it as death food. And as you mentioned, there's so many diseases that are related to that soul food, that notion of, soul food and the fried food and the pork and all of that. But there's some historical context to the soul food, and I know that you address those issues. Can you kind of talk about first of all, what is soul food? I don't know if, I'm sure through the years it probably has kind of morphed into a lot of different things, but I know there's a historical context to it. But what is soul food, and what's the historical context behind that?
Well, soul food means many things to many people.
Right.
It depends on what region of the country you come from, what state you come from, who was preparing the food in your home, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, ultimately, soul food, what we now call soul food is Southern food that has its roots in Western Africa, right? And so many of the enslaved Africans who were shipped to the Americas brought many of their culinary traditions with them. Some of them were similar, very similar skills in terms of their cooking skills. But some of them were new because they were in a very new land.
Okay,
and
so like adapting to what
so
they
in
had
places
to work with.
in places like South Carolina, people were strategically brought to South Carolina who had a background in cultivating rice, right, and that sort of thing.
Okay,
So
makes sense.
many slaves were sort of placed strategically where they had certain skills that they brought from West Africa.
Okay.
So that became a way of life in the South, right, where enslaved Africans cooked for themselves and cooked for white slave owners, and it became a culinary tradition. And so then there's people who where soul food is basically cooked and prepared by black folks, right? And so that's some of the things that we are very familiar with.
Right.
And then there's white Southern cooking, right, which is still Southern cooking, but it may taste a little differently. It may it may be seasoned differently and that sort of thing. But soul food didn't really become soul food, quote unquote soul food, until somewhere in the 1970s during the Black Power movements, where people were sort of reclaiming their blackness and identity, and were a part of the Black Power movements.
Right. So
It was about reclaiming.
It was about reclaiming.
Yeah, it was about reclaiming our everything about blackness. I mean, our food, our hair, our blackness, our language, everything.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting because, like you said, soul food does mean different things to different people. Yeah. But at the root of a lot of it, it's unhealthy type of food, or it can be.
It can be. And that's what my films, my film is not necessarily a slam on soul food in general. It's really like a launching pad to have a larger conversation about how we need to change the way we're eating the food that we're eating.
Right.
And the preparation of the food is a big part of that.
Yes.
So I still eat soul food, right? But I just eat my soul food very differently. Kale is soul food, collard greens is soul food, black eyed peas is soul food. Right. All those different things are soul food, but I just cook my soul food very differently. I cook it in a more healthy way, right? But some people believe that real soul food, right, is cooked with ham hocks and porks or
crackling bread,
all of those different things, deeply fried or overly cooked. When you're talking about greens, cooking your greens and that sort of thing. Yeah. And so that kind of preparation is what many people believe is what leads to some of the nutritional related illnesses.
Right. And it's like you said, it's making that shift. So I know in a lot of families, collard greens is a staple in a lot of black families, especially, during the holidays. And you have seen a little bit of shift on how people prepare it. They won't use ham hocks. They might use smoked turkey.
Right.
Or they might do a vegetarian style of collard greens. So I think, getting that information out there and how you can prepare foods that you like, and they taste good, but just changing, like you said, it's the preparation.
See, that's the part. I mean, the change part is the hard part. I mean, because a lot of people are resistant to that change, right? And some people is like, yo, you might as well not even make collard greens if you don't put a ham hock in it, right? I mean, and there are people who are dead set against trying things differently or a new way, right? And so they hold on to what they are used to and what they believe tastes good.
Right.
So getting people to change, get people to change their mindset and adjust their palate to something different that's hard. And so that's what my film seeks to do. My film seeks to encourage and motivate people to even embrace the idea of doing things differently. So that's what the film is about. And again, it's not a slam against soul food. You mentioned earlier that it's humorous and it makes people laugh, and that was done very intentionally. I grew up listening to KRS-One, and I remember KRS-One came out with his album called Edutainment. Right.
Yeah.
And so KRS-One at that time was all about educating people while entertaining them at the same time. And that's very much my mindset as a documentary filmmaker. I know nobody's going to want to sit down and watch a film that's going to feel like homework. Or it's going to feel like a whole lot of research, or it's going to be boring and dry and all that kind of stuff. If you want to keep people's attention, you have to make them laugh, and you have to make them think, and you have to make them feel. And so as a filmmaker, that's my goal. And if I can accomplish all of those things in one film, then I feel like I've made a successful film.
Well, in Soul Food Junkies, you did just that, because it did make people think. I remember when we had first saw your film, it was at, I believe it was a screening, and you had a panel of individuals after the film that were talking about some of the issues that you had raised in the film. So it not only was, people were laughing at the film, but after we had a chance to kind of reflect on some of the messages that were in the film as well. So that, that was powerful.
Well, that's a big part of what I do. I mean, I'm not just a filmmaker, I'm an activist, and I try to spark dialogue, that's going to lead people to action. And so I feel like that kind of critical discussion or feedback after watching my film is very important. Because, in particular with this film, Soul Food Junkies, one of the things that always happens, no matter where I show it, is that it really gets people talking. It gets people talking about their successes. And, I get people who used to weigh 360 pounds, and now they've lost 130 pounds or 150 pounds, and they're very happy and proud to share their story. I have people who stand up and they talk about how their father is my father in the film, and they've had these very difficult conversations, or they lost their father, or they lost their mother because of in part because of their diet. I have people who stand up and talk about how they're the only vegan in their family, and like
and everybody
looks at them like they're crazy, and they're trying to get the whole family to change their eating habits, and they can't do it, and they're glad the film is made, and they're going to go back and show their whole family the film, so maybe it can get them to start thinking about changing. So it just really creates a lot of conversation, and that's what I wanted to do. Can I say this? I was going to say that when I was working on this film, I believe the film Food Inc. came out.
Okay.
Food Inc.?
That's not the one. Well, just because I know there was a few. One about fast foods.
Right.
There were a few.
Probably one of the best known, well known food films is called Food Inc. Okay, and it's a scathing film about the food industry. And so, so I went to go see that film in the movie theater. It did very, very well. And every time I went to the movie theater, I looked around, and there were very few people of color in the audience. I was probably one of maybe 2 or 3 people in the audience. And there weren't many, people of color in the film, talking about the issue of health and wellness and nutrition and the food system. And so that became my goal, you know, to bring Black people and people of color into this conversation. So when I go out and I show this film and I have 150 to 200 people who are mostly Black or people of color in the audience, I'm very happy and I'm very proud, because these are issues that matter to us too, you know. And after every screening, I ask the audience, who in this room has someone who has diabetes, heart disease, cancer, is struggling with obesity? And I'm telling you, I would say almost every time it's well over 90% of the people in the room. So these issues are very personal, they're very real, and there are people who are dealing with this in a real way. And so I always try to send the message that food is important. Food impacts our communities in many different ways, right? And food can be, it can be good for you or it can be bad for you, right? And so we have to make choices. But not only do we have to make personal choices, we also have to confront a system, a food system that is inherently racist and classist, and that basically relegates Black people to eating vastly inferior food. Right.
And just, on that note, I did want to get into the community, our community. Why are there poor diets in our community? We don't want to eat badly. So why is there this struggle in our community? I know that someone in your film had mentioned that we have a class-based apartheid in our food system and the industrialization of our food. So if you could just speak a little bit to that, because there's food deserts, and maybe explain to viewers what that looks like in our communities.
Well, before working on this film, I had never heard of a food desert. I had never heard of the food justice movement. I didn't even know that there were people out in the world who were trying to educate and make people aware about food inequality. And so it was something that I had to learn. And, essentially what Mark Lamont Hill is talking about when he talks about food apartheid is that there's a two-tiered system in American culture where some people have access to healthy, nutritious food and where other people don't. And some of that is based on race and some of it is based on class, right? And so you have poor Black people who don't have access to healthy food in their communities, but there's an overabundance of fast food restaurants and processed foods and fast food restaurants and bodegas and that sort of thing. And also in white communities, that are poor, they also have access to very poor quality food. So it's about race and it's also about class and who has access to healthy food. And I can't remember what day it was, but I was making breakfast with my daughter, and I was listening to a commercial, and I heard a commercial for a fast food restaurant. It was saying like, 2 16-piece nuggets or something like that for $4. Right. And I was like, wow, that's kind of hard to beat. That's kind of hard to beat if you're struggling and you don't have a whole lot of money. Right. And you have a huge family. And your choice is, feeding them something healthy and nutritious from Whole Foods, or going to KFC or McDonald's and buying something that's going to last longer. It's going to go a further way. Right. And so people have to make very difficult choices, and a lot of it is based on economics, right? And how much money people have. And I do really believe that mothers want to feed their children good food and healthy food. I think some of it is education. Right? Education around food. A lot of people just don't know and understand how vital food is to, the vitality of their house and their communities, right? So they just make bad choices based on a lack of information. Other people just don't have the access. They don't have a supermarket, that they can drive to. When I was doing research and I was out in East Oakland in California. And I think at that time, it was a huge city with about 300,000 residents, not one supermarket in that particular community, not one. If you wanted or needed to go to a supermarket, a real supermarket, you had to take several buses or you had to drive outside of that particular area in order to go to a good supermarket. So people shop in the bodega, they shop in the liquor store. They shop wherever they can,
Right.
you know, whatever's convenient for them. And these are all based on, you know, basically structural inequality that does not make a healthy supermarket available in their community.
So, you know, it's interesting because that is so true. Even in a suburban area that we're in, you know, here on Long Island, New York, you'll see communities that have a great supermarket with fresh produce, and then you'll see other communities where they really don't have that, and that's in a suburban area. You know, you have to go outside of your community to get fresh produce or healthy food, and et cetera, et cetera. So it really is a statement to corporate America as well for not bringing those companies, those supermarkets to the areas, you know.
Well, there are a lot of people who believe that people of color and people who are not middle class, who are poor, will not spend money on healthy, quality food, and so therefore, the economics doesn't dictate having a Whole Foods or, you know, I'm using Whole Foods as an
because
example,
that's
but
like
a quality supermarket,
exactly,
a quality supermarket in their communities. And so there are a lot of people who are trying to dismiss some of those ideas about what black people want and need. And then there are other people, excuse me, who are doing a lot of activism and are creating their own new models of food sustainability, and creating new systems where people have access to healthy food. So they're doing like urban gardening and developing CSAs and food co-ops and other things that provide access to people that they didn't have before.
In the communities, and that's important. I know in your film you address some of those, you know, some of those ways to bring healthy food in the community. So, you know, we're talking to Byron Hurt. He is, again, an award-winning documentary filmmaker. He's also an anti-sexist activist. His film, Soul Food Junkies, you can see it, you know, on Netflix now, streaming. And I just want to thank him for being here this afternoon. And Byron, can you just let people know how can they get in contact with you, or how can they see your films, et cetera?
So my website is bhurt.com. You can find me on Twitter at Byron Hurt, and on Facebook it's Byron Hurt Films. So if you just type in Facebook and then /Byron Hurt Films, you should be able to reach me there. And I'm also on Instagram at Byron Hurt.
Okay. Well, we want to thank Byron for being here. I'm so excited. We are going to have a second segment also, and we're going to be talking about violence and his newest project that he's working on, Hazing, How Badly Do You Want In? Thank you for watching Conversations with Verdel Jones here on AAU Teen Talk TV.
Hi, I'm Regina Galley, and you... Oh, okay. I should wait for her to say her name?
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Hi, I'm Regina Galley.
I'm Karen Vito.
And we're from Shake It Up, and you're watching Madhouse TV.
Oh, I can't do it.
Okay.
I can't do it.
All right.
Hold on.
No problem. Hi, I'm Regina Galley.
And I'm Karen Vito.
And we're from Madhouse.
I can't do it with the two of us speaking together. So
yeah. Hi, I'm Regina Galley.
I'm Karen Vito.
And we're from Shake It Up.
And you're watching MadhouseTV.com.
I'm Tommy Marr. I'm down in St. Bart's having a good time. A lot of people at this time, they like to go have a little cocktail. But you know what I do? I'm going to watch MadhouseTV.com. You got that right.
Shut up! a madhouse! A madhouse!
I'm Tom Mealy, and you're watching MadhouseTV.com.
Hi, I'm Regina Galley, and okay. I should wait for her to say her name?
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Hi, I'm Regina Galley.
I'm Karen Vito.
And we're from Shake It Up, and you're watching Madhouse TV.
I can't do it.
Welcome. You're watching AAU Conversations with Verdel Jones. Before we start,
how do you interact with your peers? How do you interact with authority? How do you learn how to be mindful of other people?
Police are known as the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system. That means before the process starts, it has to go through the police.
welcome to AAU Teen Talk TV. You're watching Conversations with Verdel Jones. As a teacher at heart, I am dedicated to sharing relevant and concrete information in hopes that you learn something that you might not know. And in the words of Maya Angelou, when you learn, teach, and when you get, give. We have a great show this afternoon. We have a special guest in our studio, and we're going to be talking a little bit about violence in our society and the notion of hazing and what that actually means. So I'm excited to kind of bring this, this topic to the forefront. Before we get started, though, I would like to thank our sponsors, Mr. and Mrs. Roger and Shavonna Johnson. They are the founders of the Whitney E. Johnson Foundation, and they're also the executive producers of AAU Teen Talk TV and radio. And they're also the founders of AAU Youth Magazine. AAU stands for All About Us, and that's what we're about here at AAU Teen Talk. So for more information on AAU, you can go to the website, which is wejfoundation.org, and be sure to order your AAU Youth Magazine today. So again, we're going to be talking about violence, and we're going to talk a little bit about hazing and the notion of hazing. And we have a great guest in our studio, as I mentioned, to talk about this subject. So I would like to welcome Byron Hurt. Byron Hurt is... Thank you for coming.
Be with you.
Thank you. He's a award-winning documentary filmmaker. He is a anti-sexist activist. He's a writer and speaker, and he's been on numerous media outlets from BET to Fox News to MSNBC, featured in New York Times. The earliest film that I've seen was Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. A lot of acclaim for that as well. So we're going to be talking about, as I said, his newest project, Hazing, How Badly Do You Want In? But before we do that, I'd like to, again, just welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I had mentioned that you're an anti-sexist activist, anti-violence activist. What does that mean, and how did you come to be an activist in this area?
Yeah. Well, what that means is that I am a man who stands up, speaks out publicly, and educates other boys and men, as well as girls and women, about all forms of gender violence, rape, sexual assault, battering, sexual harassment, street harassment, teen dating violence, all of those different issues. I educate boys and men around the country in a lot of different spaces. I've had an incredible experience reaching and talking to boys and men from all over the country in various places around the world, in sports culture, fraternity culture, the U.S. military, virtually every single demographic of boys and men I've been able to talk to across race and across class and profession, education, all of that kind of stuff. And so essentially what I do is spark conversations and get people thinking critically about how we as boys and men can end violence against women, because most of the perpetrators of violence are males against women and even against other males. And so that's the work that I've been doing for almost 2 decades now, over 2 decades. And I started doing it because I was an athlete. I was a former athlete, and there was a new program called the Mentors in Violence Prevention Program. They were looking for former athletes and current athletes who would use their voice and their platform to actually stand up and speak out and educate other men and model a different version of manhood or masculinity. And so that's how I got into that work. It started with a program founded by Jackson Katz, who is a leading expert on these issues in his own right. And like I said, I've just had a great opportunity to learn as much as I've learned about these issues, because prior to doing it, I didn't know anything about these issues other than what I saw, but I never really had a vocabulary for violence against women. I didn't really know any statistics about these issues, and I definitely did not think that I as a man could actually do anything about it until I was challenged to do so. So that's how I got into it.
That's an interesting journey, you know, getting into as an athlete, you know, athletes we tend to have this hyper masculinity. So the notion that they actually wanted athletes to work on a project like this really speaks to them kind of figuring it out, that this really needs to happen, especially with that population of males and being able to speak to them.
Well, the reason is not because athletes are less violent than other men. I mean, the point was that athletes have a very powerful voice in our culture.
Absolutely.
And that most boys look up to male athletes and tend to listen to male athletes more than they listen to their parents or their teachers and that sort of thing. And so the idea was that if you could get someone who could speak out very strongly and passionately and intelligently about these issues, that other young boys and men would listen in a way that they don't listen to other people, and even listen to women, because women have been on the forefront of these issues for centuries, and men are resistant to hearing this stuff from women, and so sometimes we hear it better when it comes out of the mouth of a man, which is problematic, but it is what it is.
It is what it is, especially if they already have an issue, I guess, or a tendency to commit violence against women. Those are,
you know what?
I
just want to say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you know, I have learned a tremendous amount about this issue, you know, and one of the things that I have really come to understand is that there's a tremendous amount of defensiveness when talking to men about these issues. We tend to deflect a lot, you know, in other words, instead of focusing on our issues and our behavior, we tend to focus on what women have done or are doing to cause it. And there's just a lot of, like, you know, a lot of privilege and patriarchy and sexism that exists amongst men that we hold on to. And so it's very challenging. It's almost like the soul food conversation. It's very challenging to have those conversations because nobody really wants to give up what they enjoy and what they have, what they benefit from.
Those are interesting conversations, I'm sure. You know, you give workshops and presentations, you know, all around the country and worldwide. What is the thing that surprises you when you're talking to young people about this issue? There's not a whole lot excuse me, let me say that again. There's not a whole lot
sorry.
That's right.
Are you going to edit this or no?
Nope.
All right, well, there's not a lot that surprises me. All right, there's not a lot that surprises me anymore because I've been in a lot of different rooms and different spaces, and I've had so many conversations about this. So I don't really get surprised. I think what is striking to me is that I've been doing this for 20 years, and for many people, it's still like the first conversation that they're having about this issue.
Interesting.
Right? And so there's no real formal education that boys and men receive about how not to be violent.
Right, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
But there's a tremendous amount of education for boys and men on how to be violent.
Right. You know, I had, a few months ago, I had Jane Arnow on my show. She's an anti-violent, now it's my turn. Anti-violence activist, and she primarily focused on raising children in this violent society. And she talks about like a lot of different factors that contribute to violence, whether it be the guns or it, you know, what they see on TV or just our culture in general. And I know you focus a lot on the notion of masculinity and the definition of masculinity. And how does that translate into the violence that we see in general in our culture?
Well, I write about my experience walking into the culture of masculinity in Kevin Powell's book.
Okay.
The Black Male Handbook. And I write about this experience when I was 5 years old, standing in front of my house on Acorn Avenue in Central Iceland. And a little boy who was probably about 7 years old walked up to me and punched me in my face. Didn't know him.
Wow.
Never saw him before. He walked up over to me and he asked me a question. He actually asked me my address. He asked me if I knew where my address was. And
wow.
I told him, yes, I did. And then he walked up closer to me and he punched me in my eye. And I was 5 years old. And I'll never forget that. And it was like my entry into a world of violent masculinity.
Right.
Because I was a very unassuming boy at that time. I wasn't a violent kid.
Right.
But all of a sudden, I knew that if I was going to, you know, be safe, I had to protect myself, or I had to be aware of other boys' violence around me. I remember my father. I remember rushing into my father to tell him about what happened. And he took me into the family car and drove me around the neighborhood to try and find the boy, to try and fight him.
That's right.
And so, again, I think we get these cues about what it means to be male.
Yeah.
And that maleness is associated with violence. And I think that most boys, regardless of your race or your culture, learn that pretty early
on.
And I think that, you know, for boys, we just breathe a culture of violent masculinity. It's the air that we breathe. It's all around us. It's on television. It's in music.
Everywhere.
It's in the movies that we see. It's on the playground. You know, it's in sports culture. I grew up playing football. I started playing football when I was 7 years old. And you can't play football without being violent. Right. So
that's the nature of the game.
Yes, we learn very early to dehumanize other people around us. We become very desensitized to violence, and so it just becomes a part and parcel of who we are. And until somebody challenges that, until somebody, you know, shows you a different way. And
in some points, that's when they're, you know, young adults or you know, young men, that they're, as you said, you know, you're stunned by these individuals having that conversation for the first time at the age that they are.
Well, I think most young boys need to have some kind of intervention. You know, they have to have healthy models of manhood, men who they can look at and touch and feel, who are different, who don't accept violence, who don't represent a violent lifestyle, and who express themselves emotionally in ways that are healthy. And I don't really think that a lot of boys, you know, actually have access to that kind of manhood. Some do.
Some,
but, you know, I think in general, the culture at large doesn't really reward that.
Right.
You know, and let me tell you, I mean, I have conversations with boys and men all over this country, and the ways that we have been socialized to see ourselves as men are very limited. They're very narrow, right? They're not very healthy. They're destructive. They're self-destructive, and they lead to self-destructive behaviors. Sure. And this is across race. This is not just something that black men, black boys are dealing with. This is something, you know, that affects all men. I mean, it's one of the reasons why this country has the highest rates of violence in the world. Not just you know,
the world.
Yeah, the world. Right. So, yeah, we have an issue.
Yeah, that's a serious issue, and to try to combat that, you know, I really applaud and admire the work that you do. You know, it's
like rolling a big, huge boulder uphill.
That's right. Yeah, it really is. But if you can, you know, they always say if you can change a couple of minds and that mindset, you know, you're doing the work that you need to be doing. So I appreciate that, definitely. You know, we're going to talk about your newest project, and it deals with, you know, violence in our society, but in reference to organizations that actually practice, you know, forms of violence in order for someone to fit in, or how badly do you want in? So what I'd like to do is show a clip. It's a teaser of your newest project you're working on. It's called Hazing, How Badly Do You Want In? So we're going to show that clip now.
No one consents to dying, having limbs broken, or some of the really egregious things that happen. Your consent hardly ever goes that far.
People getting hit in their face, people getting punched, people getting kicked, paddling someone like a dog with a big piece of wood.
It's confusing to many people. Why would someone put themselves through hazing? I think the reality is, for many, the benefits outweigh the risks.
It is a way to maintain the integrity of the organization. And those who participate in hazing, you're the chosen lucky ones. You're more valued than those who do not participate in it.
I don't think anybody wants to be hurt. When somebody says they want to be hazed, that's not accurate. They want the reward that comes from being hazed.
In order to gain the respect and the status and the power on the other end, these are the things you have to go through.
So that was a teaser of Byron Hurt's newest project, Hazing, How Badly Do You Want In? You know, anytime I think about hazing, I always automatically, my mind kind of shifts to fraternities. Not even necessarily sororities, but always fraternities. And that's really what I think. Not till a couple of years ago, you know, I heard that there's hazing in, you know, in marching bands. And, you know, so it really runs the gamut. What is hazing, and what does that look like, and how is it through, what kind of groups actually, you know, use hazing as a method of having someone be in their group or their club or their organization?
Well, you know, a lot of people confuse bullying with hazing and hazing with bullying, but hazing is any set of actions that are basically taken on an individual, placed on an individual, where that individual is hit, harassed, punished, demeaned, humiliated, either against their will or even if they have consented to that sort of abuse. And so typically when we talk about hazing, we talk about a process where individuals are seeking membership into an exclusive organization, right? And that organization essentially has power and control over your body. And so that's essentially what hazing is. And it happens in a lot of different spaces. You know, you mentioned marching bands. You know, there's the military, there's sports culture. It happens in a lot of different places. I mean, there's hazing in the medical profession. You know, nurses and doctors, and so it happens a lot. And that's what I hope to discuss in my film, Hazing: How Badly Do You Want In? And you know, I think it's about 47% of high school students experience hazing before they enter college.
47%.
47%.
Wow.
3 out of 5 individuals experience hazing in college. So hazing is a huge problem. Most people don't talk about their experiences after they've been hazed. I think one of the ways that hazing is perpetuated, or a system of hazing is perpetuated, is through silence, is through intimidation, is through control. You know, making people feel uncomfortable and unsafe, or not like they're not one of the guys or one of the girls in the sorority or whatever the group that you belong to. And so people just they remain silent over it. So you know, hopefully the film will do its job in illuminating some really powerful stories where people are opening up and sharing their experiences, both as a victim of hazing and people who have perpetuated hazing.
Yeah, if that number, 47%.
47%.
Excuse me, percent.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, and like
I mean,
you said,
look, if you remember in high school, we had something called Freshman Day. You remember Freshman Day?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so Freshman Day
that's a form of hazing.
That is definitely a form of hazing, right? And so, I mean, I experienced Freshman Day. I went through it. You know, I was humiliated. I was kicked. I was beaten. I mean, before school even started in September. So, and I also experienced hazing, you know, as a member of the high school football team. You know? So, and that was actually sanctioned and endorsed by the coach at the time. And it wasn't over the top, but it was a part of the rites of passage of becoming a new member of the football team that was accepted. Right. And so there are mild cases of hazing, right? And then there are extreme cases of hazing, right? So in the town not too far from me in Sayreville, New Jersey, there's like this huge case that took place where many of the incoming football players were sexually hazed, right? So they were sodomized, and they were, you know, they were sexually hazed in order to become, you know, full members of that team. It's happened on Long Island. It happens all over the country, okay? And so that's hazing in that particular setting. In high schools, there's all kinds of hazing that takes place, of course, in fraternities and sororities. And some of it is emotional hazing. Some of it is doesn't rise to the level of physical violence.
Right, so there's all different types.
There's a distinction culturally in terms of what happens with hazing. So in traditionally African American fraternities and sororities, the hazing tends to be more physical. Okay. In traditionally or historically white fraternities and sororities, the hazing has more to do with alcohol abuse, sexual humiliation, sexual violence, and all of that kind of stuff. So it breaks down along racial lines. It breaks down along educational lines. It breaks down across you know, different activities, clubs, groups, and that sort of thing.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't even think. Like I said, when I think of hazing, I'm thinking, you know, some of the athletic things that you mentioned, because it did a lot of some of those things did happen, you know, on Long Island, but more, you know, fraternities and things like that. So that's interesting that there are different facets, there's different spaces, as you said, where hazing takes place. Why this film? Why did you decide? I know you go through a process of, you know, figuring out what your next project is going to be. Why did you decide to do a film about hazing?
Well, to be honest with you, I was really inspired by 2 different stories. One was a story about a young man named George Desdunes. He was a college student at Cornell University. He was an African American student who was a member of a white fraternity at Cornell, and he died as a result of alcohol poisoning at the hands of the pledgees. So they had like a turnabout night where the pledgees got to haze the fraternity brothers, and he drank way too much, and he passed out. He died, and the fraternity members dragged him to the school's library, I believe,
Oh, my goodness.
and dumped his body in the
Oh.
basement of the library. And it was a huge New York Times story. His mother was a single mom from, I think, the Caribbean.
Okay.
And she came to the United States. She worked 2 and 3 jobs in order to send her son to the best schools.
Right.
He went to, I think he got a scholarship to Cornell University, and her son died. And it was a heartbreaking story. I read the story in the newspaper, and I thought, wow, this is really powerful. And then there was a story of Robert Champion down at Florida A&M, who was a member of a marching band, the Marching 100, and he died as a result of hazing, injuries due to hazing, while he was walking back onto the school bus after a performance. And so I read those stories, and I thought about my own experiences. I'm a member of a fraternity.
Right.
And I thought, you know, this is something that could have happened to me. This is something that I could have done to someone else.
Right.
And as a filmmaker, I'm always looking for stories that are going to have a major impact. And this film made my palms sweaty. My hands are sweaty just thinking about, you know, the issues and the stories and making this film.
Right.
And so I try to choose films that I'm going to be passionate about and that are going to be cutting edge films.
Well, we have about 2 minutes left. I mean, the time really, you know, does fly, especially with this, you know, engaging conversation about this topic. For our students, what should they know about hazing, you know, for our younger, you know, viewers, and not just hazing, but violence in general, and how to protect themselves?
That's a good question. Well, see, I think the bigger issue that needs to be addressed is the structures around young people that protect them from violence. I think that's probably more important.
The bigger issue, yeah.
Because I think it's really difficult to ask young people to fend for themselves, and in many ways, you know, young people are always going to have to learn how to survive in the world that they're navigating, and that there's no way around that.
Right. Yeah.
But I think that we as adults who work in school systems have to create cultures that do not tolerate violence on any level.
Right.
And so I think that that's probably more of what the focus should be.
Okay.
Changing the culture of violence so that people are no longer desensitized to violence and don't accept it.
Right, absolutely. Well, we're talking to Byron Hurt, award-winning documentary filmmaker, about his newest project, Hazing, How Badly Do You Want In? How can people, Byron, you know, find more information about the movie and the film and all of the other films that you have? Where can they reach you?
Well, they can go to my website. It's bhurt.com. They can go to my Facebook page, Byron Hurt Films. Twitter is @Byron Hurt, and Instagram is @Byron Hurt. I don't have a website for the Hazing film yet, but I do have information on my website. So if anybody's interested about the film, they can just go to my website and click on the Hazing button on my website. And they can learn more about it.
Okay, well, thank you, Byron, for being here this afternoon. A lot of information, and I want to thank everybody out there for watching Conversations with Verdel Jones on AAU Teen Talk TV. Thank you.
Thank you.